Thank you for joining our webinar today, How to Lead Enterprise Agile. My name is Kelly Hamilton, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Today's webinar will give you actionable tips to better lead your Agile transformation, regardless of where you are in your journey. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a few key items. We want to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So first, we welcome and encourage your questions throughout the webinar. To ask a question, all you need to do is to type your question directly into the question window on the webinar panel and hit submit. We'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session following the main presentation. Secondly, we've included some key resources for you to check out during the webinar, and those are items that will be referenced throughout today. Also, if you'd like to enlarge the presentation area, you can easily click the expand button on the slide module, and it will expand on your mobile phone or desktop. And finally, we're recording today's webinar, and we'll post it live on the Exaion website later this week. I'll send you all an email once it's live in case you want to forward it along or watch it again. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Bhavani Krishnan is an Agile expert who has over a decade experience with Agile transformation at Fortune 500 and federal organizations. She believes change begins with the heart of the individual and ripples throughout the collective mindset of the organization. Bhavani surfaces and resolves the fear that underlies change by seeking all perspectives and striving for a renewed connection between people in a way that naturally supports adaptive thinking. She's also achieved the Certified Agile Leadership credentials through Scrum Alliance. We also have Mason Chaudhry. He's the COO for Exaion and an avid Agile evangelist. Mason's led the development of Exaion's Agile Adoption Maturity Model, which is designed to help organizations tackle the complexities of adopting, scaling, and improving Agile practices across the enterprise. Mason has over a decade of expertise helping organizations leverage best practices in development, management, and delivery of projects and products. He's also Safe Agile, Lean Six Sigma, and CMMI certified. So with that, Mason, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you all for joining us today. All right, let's just jump in. True Agile transformation, beyond just development teams, we all know requires structural, governance, role, and most importantly, cultural change at all levels of an organization. While adopting Agile tools, processes, and ceremonies are the prerequisite steps normally led by Agile coaches and other stakeholders, the buy-in for true cultural shift requires a great deal of Agile leadership. Organizations of all sizes and Agile maturity are grappling with how to scale Agile across the enterprise, and one of the biggest hurdles to scaling is figuring out how to get interdependent teams, business units, and layers of management to work together in achieving organizational Agile goals. While the answer to this predicament isn't really a secret, it is something that many businesses are currently struggling to figure out. True Agile leadership at every layer of a business, especially that middle pudgy layer, is necessary to drive the cultural shift that powers Agile transformation. So today, our Agile expert, Bhavani Krishnan, will walk us through the tenets of Agile leadership, and not the kind just described in theory, but the type of leadership that actually brings change across enterprises. So Bhavani, with that said, tell us about some of your experiences.
Hey, first of all, thanks for having me again. So Mason, yes, I've been living and breathing Agile officially since 2006. All through the years, I've felt this one burning need for leadership support. I worked at federal, commercial, nonprofit, big corporate, and small boutique startups, you name it. One common force of matter for everywhere I've been is there are people who feel the need for change, create the urgency, and make honest effort for Agile adoption. It takes off great, but after the initial success, they fail to transform. The biggest wins are usually, maybe just stand-ups and with any luck, some planning sessions here and there. I've talked to Agile enthusiasts here and also abroad in many different countries, and we all share the same viewpoint. There is not enough buy-in and support from leaders in the organization. We all agreed one of the reasons is the lack of true leadership. Top-down mandate initiates the endeavor, and bottom-level acceptance, even with some resistance, moves the needle further. But it falls flat when there is not enough buy-in from the middle layer. My pitch today is successful Agile transformation requires effective leadership at all levels.
And Bhavani, I get that, and Agile leadership has been something at the forefront for a long time, but why is it a movement now?
Well, if you think about it, the primary role of a leader in an organization is to build skill, competency, and capability. To be a successful leader, they have to be powerful enforcers and empower change in direction to the new way of business. True leaders have a very personal and permanent impact on individuals. They motivate you. They take personal interest in your development. They encourage you, and they influence you in a positive way. I can take a personal example here and talk about it. 4 years ago, I was part of a transformation where the initiative was led by the VP of Enterprise Data. He was so involved at the initial stages of the adoption. He created local champions. He changed the physical layout to be more Agile-friendly. He engaged with the teams on the ground. He brought SMEs like me, and the organization was committed to the success. Of course, they faced many challenges like all organizations do, but they stuck with it. And a few years later now, you can see that they are a great example and are a successful case study. This topic is a priority today because you need a leader that can guide through the transformation, someone that can see past the initial setbacks, create an environment that is safe to experiment, but, fail within boundaries. So many organizations choose to go Agile for many reasons. But whatever might be the reason, Mason, it's important that there is a strong leadership team behind it to influence a culture. Again, culture is something that cannot be enforced. It's a behavioral pattern that can only be modeled, but modeled by the right players that has the right impact and influence. A lot of organizations put conscious effort and time to implement Agile at the enterprise level.
Yeah, you're right. And at the enterprise level, a lot of organizations will bring in external Agile coaches and work with their dev teams. But what about local champions that are internal?
Good question. A mindful organization will spend as much effort building their internal champions and competencies to maximize and maintain stability as much as they put effort to bring in the external coaches or SMEs. I've consulted at many organizations through successful transformations. And as a consultant, my goal is always to help the client succeed with the transformation and sustain the success even after I leave. I want to be able to create that talent pool there. So I would recommend that once the organization decides to go through the transformation, it needs to establish a team, one that is made of leaders from different levels within the organization that can inspire and influence.
So you're saying project, portfolio, not just the C-suite. Why?
For a few reasons, mainly to avoid the risks of being perceived as command and control, to avoid the single flavor of leadership, to provide color from many possible layers within the organization. Now, balance equals harmony. So you want to be able to mobilize leadership and be in your talent pool, like you mentioned, within the portfolio, within the program, within the team level. So if the leadership is made just of the people from the top, they won't have the true sense of problem on the ground. Now, people from just the ground will never have the authority to influence the change organically. So, I always tap into my favorite quote from one of my favorite leaders: top down plus bottom up equals permanence.
Absolutely. All right, so Bhavani, what type of leadership would you recommend? What works best, or is there a combination that you've experienced in your career that's provided results?
Well, it depends on the landscape. I would say study the situation. Directive and authoritative leadership is not all that. It provides clear direction, goal, and purpose, which in turn results in consistency and predictability. Leadership style sets the tone for the organization's culture. So I would combine that with the 4 leadership styles. Find the one combination or 2 or multiple that works for your organization. It may be different through the different phases of transformation you will go through, and that's completely fine. But how much of each depends on the situation and depends on the organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Very true. So if you could, please run us through the 4 leadership styles you're mentioning.
Sure. Directive, transformational, servant, and participative.
Gotcha. So let's first talk about directive leadership. It sounds rigid, it sounds legacy, and when I think about Agile, it's a collaborative culture. How and when would you recommend bringing in directive leadership?
So Mason, what you said about rigid, it's a common misconception. Directive leadership does have its place and its merit when applied effectively. So if you look on the screen, you see that we have, this quadrant, right? So if you have team members that are highly motivated and highly skilled, then use less directive, but with some oversight. But if you have people in your team who are, very low skilled, but then low motivated as well, you need to apply the directive leadership. And you won't be able to provide enough autonomy to that team. So use directive leadership when you have a team and it's made of new people and novices, or while they're trying to learn the culture, when they're trying to learn the organization or even the business at that point. But as they grow, you may not need to monitor as closely, and you may be able to allow more autonomy. And also, directive leadership has its merit when there is crisis with severe consequences. And often teams are looking to their leaders to make difficult decisions. So, a product manager could be someone that can effectively use directive leadership. He or should be able to set the priority of the business backlog and guide the team through. Of course, they may need to consult the feasibility, but ultimately they set the priority. So that's a good example where you could apply directive leadership.
Fair enough. So what's the most popular leadership style?
Well, one of the most popular and effective is the transformational leadership. It's about bringing people together around the organization's goals and values. It's about exploring the organization's definition of culture and working to improve it. I can't think of a better person than Steve Jobs when I think of a transformational leader. He was a personification of passion, perfection, simplicity, and sophistication. And we see that as a proof with, all the products and other things that they have. So in my viewpoint, he was an example of the 4 pillars of transformational leader.
What are those? What are the 4 pillars?
So let me walk you through an example. Once in a while, we get the opportunity to be inspired by such leaders. I remember in 2012, I was actually working for a nonprofit organization. The director of the IT and infrastructure saw the opportunity to transform the organization. He understood the urgency and the importance of influencing the culture, not just his department, but for the whole organization. He started evangelizing to stimulate and challenge the status quo to the other departments like accounting, HR, marketing, etc. He worked with the executive leadership to mandate Agile training for everyone in the organization. People were inspired and motivated for change. Agile became the culture for them a few years later. But, don't be mistaken. They did have their growing pains. They did have their hardships. But the big challenge for them was space. They made executive decisions to make that a priority, move to a better landscape that was more open and Agile friendly. I must say it was not an easy change. It was not inexpensive either. But it was possible because people respect him tremendously. His leadership was so contagious that everyone was so bought on. Now these are the 4 pillars that you need as a transformation leader.
Transformational leadership is phenomenal, but it's not found in every layer of an organization. So with that said, servant leadership can bring similar buy-in. I know there's a lot of good scholarship out there around servant leadership, including the book Dare to Serve, How to Drive Superior Results by Serving Others by Cheryl Backhelder. What are your thoughts on servant leadership?
Well, let me talk about that book first. It's a great read. It is a book that says it all. Just reading through the synopsis, you will find that she turned a low-performing restaurant chain to a profitable entity. You will learn that by following a more collaborative and servant leadership style, she was able to bring the market share from a mere 14% to a whopping 21% in the matter of few years. We actually have a link provided on the resource section here to that book if you want to read more about it. But let me answer your question about servant leadership. It's a great way to build rapport and gain trust, Mason. Trust and empowerment are the two most efficient way to grow. Active listening, responding to feedback, or just a couple of examples of servant leadership.
And speaking of examples of servant leadership, in my own experience in the dev world, Scrum Masters are great examples of servant leaders.
Agreed, but servant leadership is not limited to just the Scrum Masters. They can be anybody in the team. When I worked at a major financial organization like a couple of years ago, there was a college graduate that joined the team. I was amazed how effectively he was able to resolve conflict and gain consensus within the team. It didn't matter if the topic was as complicated as full-stack development, at least to me, or as simple as, choosing the cupcake frosting flavor. He had a knack for building a sense of community. It was no surprise that he also won, a few accolades from his colleagues. So again, to answer the question, Scrum Masters are not the only servant leaders. That can be anybody.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you from my own experience, servant leadership is absolutely empowering. I'm a huge proponent of it. A lot of Agile practices, though, are built on participation of all stakeholders. Tell us about participative leadership.
It's a very democratic approach on leadership. It builds consensus. Leaders still decide here, but they do that by compromising, by collaborating with, your talent pool, people whom you trust, and gaining consensus that engages all. Participative culture believes in transparency and seeking input and inclusiveness. A safe environment is created here where the team members are free to raise questions, concerns without the risk of retaliation or judgment. This improves morale. And this is a great approach for setting strategies where you can gather people around and build consensus. This creates unity. Leaders in this type of approach believe that everybody gets a seat at the table. Now, this provides that model, that positive culture. But one word of caution, though, it is not a good approach when you are on a time crunch or you have to make quick decisions with, great consequences, especially if your team does not have access to the strategic goals and vision.
All right, Bhavani. So far, you've described the pros and cons of some leadership styles and given some examples. These styles provide value and measured outcomes if accorded correctly. What happens when all of this change is introduced in an organization that is just beginning its transformation journey?
Well, it's a common understanding that when you introduce change in the business process, the organizational structure and culture, it's just normal to expect changes in behavior and productivity, just to say the least. Organizational change management is a strategic and systematic approach to address the human side of this transition and transformation.
All right, OCM. So what can management do to set the stage for this?
I would recommend to start with an assessment, one that is comprehensive and yet simple enough to capture the current landscape of where the organization is. You need to know where you're at, right, before you can understand where to go to meet them. Be sure to look at multiple aspects of people, processes, and tools. I've used Exion's assessment model in the past that I can highly recommend. You can involve the team, and you can get a spider web radar of where your organization is. Follow that up with a roadmap and prioritize. And prioritization is a very challenging subject, and the Scaled Agile framework has a very good tool called Weighted Shortest Job First, or WSJF in short, to effectively prioritize any backlog. So once you have had a good handle on where to start, leadership should start communicating effectively. And you can use any one of the organizational change management models out there.
All right, so there are a few models out in the marketplace. What are some of those models? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. There are actually two that I can highly speak of from experience. One is called the Adkar Model. The ADKAR, it's an acronym that stands for Awareness of the Need for Change. D stands for Desire to Support the Change. K, the knowledge of how to change. And A, again, the ability to demonstrate skills and behaviors. And R for reinforcement to make the change stay. So if you look at the screen, you would see that the first A and D, where you need to create the awareness and you need to bring in the desire to support the change, falls under the current. So that's where your current landscape is. From there, you transition to understanding how that knowledge, the knowledge of how to change, right? You need to bring in the experts. You need to bring in SMEs and coaches because they are the ones that are going to help you or create the internal knowledge to change that. Then you move on to, within the transition period, that's where you're actually trying to demonstrate the skills and behaviors. From there, you move to the future where you want to be able to reinforce to make the change stick, to make the change stay for a longer time, to sustain that.
You know, it's interesting. Adkar, in my own experience, has been a successful model not only in migrations to new technology, but looking at business process. So what's the other model you advocate?
Oh, that's Cotter's 8-step model by John Cotter. It has 3 phases in this with 8 steps. So again, if you look at the screen, you see that the first 3 green bars are creating a climate for change. That's when you're actually creating the urgency. You're creating common interest for the change that you're going to be advocating, and you're developing a vision and strategy for the change. The next 3 yellow bars are engaging and enabling the whole organization. This is where you're communicating that vision and the strategy with the larger audience. You're trying to empower your people on the ground to go for that change, and you're trying to gain quick wins. The next 2 blue bars is where you're trying to implement and sustaining that change. This is where you're trying to leverage those wins to model the culture within the company. And you're trying to sustain that and embed that as part of a culture.
Gotcha. And, some of the other models out there include Lewin's change model, Kubler-Ross change curve, the Satir model. With a lot of these, and with OCM in general, there tends to be chaos. And even as effective as your model may be, you've got to find a way to rein in that chaos and make things seamless. Bhavani, how can we do that?
Mason, you're right. Any change is hard, no matter how small or big. Although, I don't think that it can be seamless, but it can definitely be a smoother experience if one can strategize it. Where leadership can help tremendously, apart from leading the change, is to support, empower, and be patient. Commit to the change and be persistent. It may take a long time, and that's okay. You are gaining shorter wins every step of the way. Do not succumb to the old ways at the first sign of distress. As you mentioned, Virginia Satir, a renowned author and therapist, her model for change can be of help. Her model talks about what to expect and how to cope when change is imminent.
So she's got multiple phases in that model. Can you describe them to us?
Sure, absolutely. So there are actually 4 or 5 or sometimes even 6, depending on what picture or which website you would go to learn about that. Let's walk through those. So again, if I can get your attention to the screen, you would see the first step is, or the first phase is, status quo. This is where an organization is largely comfortable with how they're working, their ways of business. But because someone realized that they need to change, someone realized the sense of urgency, change is introduced in the form of speed, like an Agile coach. And as a result, you see the resistance. I would recommend the combination of directive and transformational leadership here, because you want to be able to guide the team that, hey, this urgency is real and we sense it. And if we don't change it, it's going to be hard. So you need leaders who are more directive and transformational there. The next step you see is chaos. Process of change has begun at this stage. No amount of change, small or minuscule, is worth it. But that's mainly because of the element of uncertainty and unfamiliarity of what to expect. Fear needs exploring and normalizing. Introduce coping mechanisms like focus groups, employee councils, community or practice, or even like 10-10 with your immediate managers to deal with that. Apply attributes of participative leadership here. Your organization needs to be unified through this chaos. But remember, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Just gain some comfort from the thought that the teams are transforming here. The next set of phase is the new possibilities. Phase of new possibilities where you are integrating. They're learning, and they're getting comfortable with new ways of working. Teams start to reconsider their limits and push themselves. Apply servant leadership here. Seize the moment and gain consensus. Build a community. Promote team-building activities and encourage transparency. The last one, though, this is the most powerful and this is the most important one, is to practice them, right? So now your teams have gone through this, big curve, downward curve, actually, of, resisting through it, accepting the foreign elements, going through the chaos, understanding what the transforming idea is, and then integrating the new possibilities, but now they need to be able to practice that. Empower the team, strengthen and sharpen them. But before they get to this stage, significant amount of time will pass, and that's completely fine. So be patient, support and encourage through. Remember, it is a journey. You may see repetitive patterns of the whole thing, from resistance to transforming ideas to integration. It can also be mismatched, and it doesn't have to follow the same pattern there. But that's totally normal. Model positive behavior as a leader and reward. Engage with them.
All right, that's some really good Agile therapy. I personally know how passionate you are about this subject, and you could go on this tirelessly. We're getting closer to the ending. Can you summarize in a few steps where our listeners could begin and how they could move forward?
Sure, Mason. You're always on the mark. Let's look at the 5 steps to implement. The first one is assessment. Assess your culture. At the first sign of distress, take stock of where you are. Start with assessing the culture. Use an assessment model to understand where you're at. Do a SWOT analysis, which looks at your strength, weakness, opportunity, and then the timing. Identify the gaps. Create a vision roadmap of where you want to be, and most importantly, why. Why do you want to improve? What does that gain the organization? Communicate that. Be transparent within boundaries. Map out and understand how you need to prioritize. Define that.
I appreciate you speaking to the model. I mean, it's a holistic model that's brought value or brings value in the federal, commercial, and nonprofit space. There is a link to this model provided in the resources section of this webinar.
Agreed. I've used that model a few times, and it always has given me great comfort in understanding where the teams have been, and it's an easy tool to use too. So the next step would be to rolling out strategy. Create an incremental rollout strategy. In my experience, phasing out the implementation always works. Phase N-1 is creating the urgency. The next phase from there is to provide the training, experimenting with different Agile frameworks, whether it is Scrum, Kanban, a combination of that, or even applying some safe principles there, but implementing best practices, including identifying roles and responsibilities. Because in my personal experience, most oftentimes what I've seen organizations do is they get excited about the adoption and transformation, but they forget to define the roles and responsibilities to fit the new ways of working. That's very important. Phase 2 is identifying meaningful and valuable metrics, your KPIs to measure the progress. Phase 3 is improving best practices. getting to the next level of maturity. Phase 4 is continue to raise the bar and improve from what you've learned. You can establish a center of excellence. And then, phase 5 is to focus on lean flow versus velocity from the get-go. You can always, look ways of increasing throughput as they mature.
All right, so roadmaps, using holistic models, defining the strategy. What's next?
So, Mason, it's important for leadership to maintain effective communication all through this. So it's very important that we need the leaders to lead the transformation. Plan for success. Start small. Pick a pilot team. Implement the best practices and create a talent group. You can scale up from there, but you need to first learn to improve and then expand. That would create lasting success. Next, you need to identify leaders at multiple or all levels if possible. That would be luxury. Executives that are open advocates of Agile. This is where you would have, the top level mandates. These are the people that are creating the urgency. These are the people that are driving lean management. Then you have senior leaders who are the champions of change. They are, there to improve the process. They're creating role models. They are the ones that are driving the right metrics. Then you have managers who are the immediate changes. They promote knowledge workers. They promote and they model the trust relationship between their direct resources and themselves. And they encourage shared ownership.
Bhavani, what's interesting here real quick, so you've mentioned set the strategy, and to me this is the meat and potatoes part of this conversation. Find leaders and champions at all levels like you just mentioned, and then it is time to execute.
Absolutely, absolutely. But strategic execution. I'm always big about strategizing, especially for early wins and lasting success. Define clear ownership and create accountability. Align on value delivery and execute with agility. Think about a product implementation strategy. Productize your organization if you can. Investment themes at the executive level. Now, these are the people you want to be accountable for KPIs to measure strategic business value. Product management. These are the people who should be accountable for driving business value. And then product owners. These are the people whom you want to be accountable for delivering business value. Now, we cannot forget the teams, right? Now, these are the people who are accountable for delivering the MVP, the minimum viable product. So this is why it's important to create leadership at all levels, Mason, to drive through success and sustain it.
And absolutely, and the roles you describe are the new Agile paradigm. So what I'm really hearing is Agile for the enterprise. Once you have success with a few teams, scale up and expand. Focus on lean product development, and always, this is an Excion thing right here, maintain customer-centric approach. And what I'm hearing is for continuous improvement, you got to keep up with what's happening in your teams.
Well said, Mason. With so much happening, you need to take pulse in regular intervals. And whatever forms of metrics they might be, you try to measure throughput, measure your team health, measure process effectiveness, and measure your KPIs. Now, all of the above have to produce some value, some business value to you. Do not go down the path measuring team health and start comparing that between teams. What makes sense to one team may not for the other. Now, do not confuse throughput with velocity, as an example. Throughput measures business value delivery versus velocity is a personal benchmark for a team. And just that. But as they mature, maybe a 5-point story, can become 2 points in estimation. But that doesn't mean that their throughput has reduced. It's the opposite. It's just that their maturity has doubled, essentially. So focus on the right metrics, but do focus on it, and you want to take pulse in regular intervals.
For those who are listening today who are managers, I totally agree with Bhavani. Velocities could be measuring how fast you're getting to nowhere, where throughput actually measures value and quality provided.
True. It's important for leadership to be active participants in all of this, right? Be active listeners and provide guidance. So if I may, request your attention to the screen here, you see that there are two sides to this, right? The old and the new. And you see three different sections in here: people, process, and tools. So within the people section, you want your organization to move from order taking to partnership. And that could be, anywhere between the project managers to the team, or, to the resource managers, to their, direct contributors, from one place to the other. From siloed to feature-based teams. You don't want siloed teams where you have, this humongous organization where your development is one department, your testing is another department. You have infrastructure, you have environment, you have program management. All of those tend to be siloed, but you want to move from that to the feature base. Now, from special skill to shared skills. Now, you cannot completely eliminate teams who are specially skilled, but in order for you to reap the benefits of a great collaborative organization, you want to be able to build cross-functional teams. And for that, you need to be able to promote that within everybody in the team. So that's where shared skill comes. Now, if we focus on the process aspect, move from projects to products, right? Move from waterfall to agile. We all know that there is benefit there, proven benefits there. From outputs to outcomes, which are more measurable, which drive business value and focuses on business value. Now, from technology perspective, move from point-to-point interfaces to APIs, from manual to automation, from discrete applications to platforms. Now, all throughout this, it's very important for leadership to be able to communicate this vision. And in my opinion and experience, if leadership has been able to go from the old side to the new side in a reasonable time frame, that's reason for celebrating. That's your success right there. And, as I talk about all of this, I have to tell you that I don't believe in, one or the other type of leadership. I don't believe in autocracy or democracy in an organization. Successful implementation needs both in balance. So stay calm and be agile.
Fantastic. So Bhavani, thanks for navigating us through the different leadership styles. You mapped them to the Agile arena, described OCM models that brought your team's value, and detailed steps towards a strategy. Now, for those listening today, there is quite a bit of information in here. Please feel free to reach out to us to learn how maybe we can help your organization align your leadership using our models and expertise. And if, at a minimum, if you'd like to see this deck, as Kelly mentioned before, please feel free to reach out. And Kelly, I'll hand it back to you for questions.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your time and that insight. We have quite a few questions to get through, and if you're on the line, if you have any additional questions after going through this, please feel free to add those into the question window, and we will get to them. So first off, let me ask this, Bhavani, I think this one's for you. It says, hi, I'm a Scrum Master. We've been trying to transform from waterfall to agile for the past 2 years. We have had some success, but not measurable. We have project managers checking for status directly with the team, program managers commuting to client, no significance to sprint review. What can I do for some quick wins?
It sounds like there is definite misalignment of roles and responsibilities. As you were reading through the question, Kelly, it seems like that the project managers, are doing things that doesn't fit in their role, right? The project managers shouldn't be asking for status. They should be able to leverage the team dashboard, attend the daily scrum, wait till the 16th minute for any topic that was not addressed. And it shouldn't be the program manager that's directly communicating. It should be more of the product owner that should be communicating to the client, and the team should be able to get direct customer feedback through, your demos and sprint reviews and such. But for quick wins, I would recommend to gather the respective teams and define their roles and responsibilities. It's a common understanding that project managers and program managers tend to think that they don't have a role in an Agile environment. They have this ambiguity that when cleared up should smooth things over. Educate them, maybe through community of practice. Give them, some insight into your Agile Center of Excellence and invite them. Make them part of the process. Again, some of it could be, driven by the fear that they may not belong there, that they're just, trying to do things and sometimes, does not fit into the environment.
Thanks for that. Okay, so the next one we have is, my Agile team is working hard and bought in, but we're having trouble getting our C-suite on board and to stop changing directions. What can we do?
It's a very common situation and one that is close to my heart. I would say, actually an insider tip, collect data of what it does to your team's productivity. Show them velocity and throughput, lead time, cycle time, and read the trends of how this is impacting the team. Show them the statistics that, you lose 30% of productivity every time you're switching context. I would recommend dedicated team that has a product focus. And from trying all of this, you're still, running into the same situation. Maybe seek help from a coach or the Center of Excellence within your organization if you have one established. Also, share this webinar. Share this webinar if you need to educate your leadership. Hope this helps, and then, keep the passion. Best of luck.
Okay, so I've got a couple more. Can a leader possess all leadership styles? And are there certain circumstances in which a leader should dial up or dial down the various styles? What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. Everybody as a person, they have their own leadership style, right? Like we mentioned before, there's not one that could fit all the situations. You may need to apply, different leadership styles from, a little bit of directive leadership style, a little bit of, participative, where you need to give a seat at the table. But at the same time, your organization may be going through, this phase where you may not be able to give everybody a seat at the table, where you need to, wear the hat of that directive leadership. Or directive leader, and those are the situations that you may need to scale up or scale down. But again, as a person, we all have a combination of one or two, or even all four that I just mentioned here. It just again depends on the situation. And we can talk more if you like to, and we can. You can actually email Mason or myself, and we will be able to help you with more direct situational stuff.
Great. Okay, so our next question is, does servant leadership need any specific qualifications?
Well, let's think about it. So servant leadership, again, if you remember what we were just talking about, it's more about building that trust with your team or whomever you're trying to serve at that point, right? This is one that grows organically within an organization. Again, if you are in a Scrum Master role, there are quite a few books that I can recommend to you. There are quite a few resources that I can walk you through. But mostly the servant leadership, it's just one thing that's very important there is the active listening. If somebody is coming to you and they are, trying to gain your attention, listen to them. To me, that's very important. That's how you build trust. That's how you build rapport with them. And that's one big thing that I see today missing is that people like to talk, but you have to be an active listener as well for you to promote and model that behavior.
Great. Thank you for that, Bhavani. If you have any additional questions, please send them in. We have one last one so far. Bhavani, how do you scale to an organization of 1,000 people?
It depends on where you are at within that company. There are multiple ways You could, again, I would start with the assessment, in my opinion. That's a great way to assess where your organization is, and you have to have a vision, right? You're saying that you're trying to scale up to 1,000 people. You could be maybe 20 now, you could be 100 now, or you could even be 500 now. But you need to have a vision of where you want to scale up to and base that approach. Go, with the first few steps of assessing where you are at. What is it that you want to do when you scale up to that level, and what are some of the, principles for your organization once you scale, and what are you trying to get out of when you do scale? So again, I'm sorry I'm not able to walk you through all the steps, but I'm definitely happy to further and expand this, in an email or maybe even a phone call or a chat with you. And then, Mason is there to talk to you as well.
Just want to add that we have a Agile assessment that can be free to you if you are interested in taking a look, as Bhavani's mentioning.
Okay, great. We have one additional question that's come in, so if you have more, please send them our way. In general, Bhavani and Mason, how long does it take to transform a team?
In my experience, it has taken anywhere, for transforming a team. So if you're talking about just a team, it could be anywhere, from 6 months to a year. But if you're talking about teams, it could be longer. And it depends on where you're transforming from and where you're trying to transform to. So again, it's all situational, right? But in my opinion, it can be anywhere from 6 months to even 2 years.
Great, thank you for that. Our next one is, if a product owner has multiple projects, how should they prioritize the work with their team?
I actually face this day in, day out, in my coaching career. It's like product owners are always scarce to find, right? And if a product owner is just dealing with 2 teams, then that's actually a luxury. So I would use the WizJF. There are actually leaner versions of it that Mason and I can provide you. But, if you want to just go vanilla, you can actually use the WizJF, the way to shortest job first from Scaled Agile. They have a very good way of helping you understand what is the cost of delay, what is the opportunity enablement, what is the risk reduction, and what happens when you don't prioritize some of this. And it's a good way to remove emotion from your assessment, so you're not biased on one project team versus the other product team. So I would recommend WizJF.
Great. So this may tie along into those, so I want to make sure you answer it. How is work shared between Agile teams for larger projects? What are your thoughts on that?
So when you say larger projects, I would like to understand a little bit better, but assuming that they are within the same portfolio, you could have, and again, if they share the same vision and the goal, assuming that they are within the same program, this is where you could apply the SAFE model, the Scaled Agile Framework model, where, I could tie this back to the other question to how they can scale to a team of 1,000 members, right?
Will you address it if they are not within the same portfolio?
If they're not within the same portfolio, then you would actually run into the same situation that I talked about, context switching. So we do not want them to be, shared between multiple projects because, again, you're going to run into issues where, teams are not finishing things on time, teams are not, meeting their metrics. You would see their productivity go down. So it's like, touching on different things, but not completing any one of them.
Great, thank you for that. How do you plan capacity into the future?
Oh, great question. I love it. You would actually have to have teams maybe for 2 or 3 sprints in order for you to understand what's the capacity of your team. But if you are just starting new, I would say there's a technique called guesstimating it. It's just common knowledge that you would think that if you have a team of 10 people, then you just take that and then multiply that by however many days you have in a sprint. thinking that you're following Scrum. And SAFe actually has a model as well, which says 1 person per day, 1 point per person per day. So if you have 5 people in a team, then you end up with 40 points, assuming that they're all going to be available for the entire sprint. You can take off that 1 point, and if they are, if you have some available time days, time off, or predictable days off. What you need to be cautious about, though, if you have someone that just calls off, then your metrics are skewed at that point. But you just have to deal with that at that time. But again, for meaningful metrics to identify what the capacity is for your team, you have to have some empirical data. And you usually get that good gauge of what a team can produce after 2 or 3 sprints, because then your team's velocity tends to normalize. And that's how you would be able to help your team through it.
These are great questions. We have a few more, so if you have some additional ones, we still have some time, send them through. So Ravani, our next question is, do you think every organization will and should go Agile?
I don't know if they will, but I definitely will say they should go Agile. Again, you're asking an Agile coach and an Agile expert who's lived and breathed through, Agile for the past decade or so. And I would tell you more. Not even just an organization. I would say every household should go Agile. I've, had great success with my high school senior who was actually struggling to, keep a tab on his homework. And I've talked to many other Agile coaches, and I've recommended that. And there's definitely benefit in going Agile.
Great. Okay, so our next one, and I might state this wrong. So how do you manage run work, break fix?
I would like to know a little bit more about what do they mean by run work. If it is, assuming that these are the ad hoc types of work, I would definitely, and if this is an organization that, tends to get more of these ad hoc type of work, you should actually plan during your planning session to add some capacity to that. Maybe it's, 10% of your sprint is addressing through the run work or, break fix work or ad hoc type of work. But you should know better, maybe 1 or 2 sprints into your transformation and add that to your capacity. So your teams are not, always context switching. They definitely know that, hey, look, we've dedicated a few percentage to address to this type of situation. But, if you're able to manage to add those to the backlog, I would definitely recommend that, because that way your team is not, focusing on different things within the same sprint. Another idea that comes to my mind is, if you can, have your team follow Kanban. Kanban is a great framework for this type of team who are, who cannot predict work. Scrum works really well when your product backlog is set, your priority is set, and you have a dedicated team. But Kanban works definitely better in a situation where you cannot actually predict what comes next, right? Where you might have more run type of work or ad hoc type of work where you take them through the different swim lanes. So that way, the team is always in this mode of we know what is today, but we may not know what is tomorrow.
Great. Well, those have been some great questions, and thank you, Ravani, for all the feedback. We hope everyone on the line that we've answered your questions. I've got Mason's email address on the screen. If you have additional questions, if you'd like some more information, have thought about things and want to ask Ravani some questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You have my email and your email address, or you can reach out to Mason directly, and we can make sure that we get those responses for you. Ravani and Mason, thank you so much for your time today. And everyone on the line, we will send you a link to this recording in case you want to forward it along to your teams, even to your executive team. We hope this was a really beneficial webinar for you as you are working to improve how to lead enterprise Agile.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Mason.